Huh. No. Oh man, I gotta make another video. There's too many remaining questions. Too many things left unanswered. I gotta make another video. Hi guys, Andreas here, and the first thing I'm gonna say is thank you to everyone who reminded me about all the things I forgot to test in my previous Tamron 17 to 70 video. But seriously, if you guys haven't watched that, I'll link it somewhere on the screen so you can check it out. But there are a couple of things that people asked about, and I did want to deliver some of those very scientific tests. One is low light capability in both photo and video. One is a little bokeh test, and another is some flare resistance testing with the Tamron 17 to 70. So here we go. All right, so the first test we'll do is let's check out how the autofocus reacts on the Tamron in this kind of lighting situation, shall we? And while we're testing that, I'm just gonna go get a drink from the basement. So this is the Sigma 16mm f1.4 now, at f1.4 of course. However, we've had to adjust the ISO to ISO 200 instead of 800 because the image was simply way too bright at ISO 800 and it probably would have sprained your eyes. Anybody get that reference? No? Just me? All right, I'm old. Okay, so how's the autofocus happening? Is it tracking me well? Is it following me well on the Sigma? How does it compare? How's the close focusing compare to the Tamron? Is it similar? You guys want to see the two next to each other? Well, here are the two next to each other. And how is it following me if I leave the frame? And I come back. And I leave the frame. And I come back a little closer. How's it doing? And here's the lowly Sony 18 to 135, which by the looks of things is struggling even at f3.5 and 18 mils. So let's crank up the ISO a little bit. So 18 to 135 in the same dimly lit room at f3.5. We've had to crank up the ISO to 1600 compared to the Tamron, which is at 800, and the Sigma, which is at 200. Hopefully this image looks somewhat similar in exposure. That way it's a fair fight. This isn't a fair fight. The Sigma's gonna kick their ass, let's be honest. But anyway, let's continue testing this Sony 18 to 135, moving around here. It's tracking me pretty well. And what happens if I leave the frame really fast? And I come back really fast. And I leave the frame. So here is the Tamron in low light. Yes, I am re-recording a voiceover over this video because I suck at talking to the camera. So let's check out how the autofocus is. Let's check out how it performs in low light. Now, I am keeping all the lenses at the same settings, even though they're underexposed, to show you at the same time what the difference in the amount of light that they take in using the same settings is, other than the aperture, of course. And here is the Sony 18 to 135. Now, as you can see at f3.5 wide open at 18 mils, it's a little darker than the Tamron. However, in image quality, there's not a huge difference. What I'll do at the end of the full screens is I'll split the screen into 3, adjust the exposure of the Tamron and the Sony a little bit, just so you guys can get an idea of what the image quality and noise is like. Now, here's the Sigma f16 1.4. Oh god, I suck. Here's the 16mm f1.4 from Sigma. And as you can see, it's way brighter. So if you're shooting in low light, there really is no substitute for really high quality f1.4 lens. Even at f2.8, the Tamron struggles to keep up here. So, and the autofocus, of course, is excellent, as most of you know, with this lens. So let's check out the side-by-side comparison now. So here are all 3 lenses, side by side by side. This is without the exposures adjusted, so you can get an idea of what they all look like and how do they compare to each other in terms of light. And now we're going to adjust the exposure And here we are seeing all three again, but this time with the exposures bumped up a little bit so you can see the noise and the image quality of each one. Now, this isn't a perfect test because we weren't shooting in a flat profile, but still it gives you a good indication. So here's our first bokeh comparison between the Sony and the Tamron. Both lenses shot at their longest focal length to give you an idea, 135 for the Sony on the left, 70 millimeters for the Tamron on the right. And I think both lenses do a pretty good job of rendering the bokeh here. The difference, of course, being that Tamron allows you to get that creamy bokeh much earlier in the focal range than the Sony, simply because of that f2.8. As you can see, the Sony is being shot at f5.6 at 135 millimeters. Now, because the Sony does not allow you to really get much of a blurred background in the lower end of the focal range, this next comparison highlights that aspect. So the Sony, I was able to get some bokeh happening in blurry background depending on the distance of the objects at about 49 millimeters at f4.5. So that was kind of the best I could do for something that looked good. Whereas with the Tamron, right from 17 millimeters at f2.8, I was able to get a blurry background, albeit somewhat busy, but it kind of gives you an idea of what both lenses are capable of at the widest focal length in which you can get some nice bokeh. And just to highlight that point a little bit more, we have a comparison here of 96 millimeters on the Sony and 35 on the Tamron. I tried to get them as close as possible in terms of the field of view, but it still gives you an idea about how much more bokeh the Tamron is able to give you versus the Sony. Now, just to give you an idea of what both lenses are capable of in low light. So these were both shot at indoors at about 35 millimeters. Again, Sony on the left, Tamron on the right. And what I want to highlight here is both are shot at wide open at those respective focal lengths, but the Tamron was able to get at 1/25 of a second versus the Sony at 1/10, both at ISO 100. So in terms of indoor shooting, the Tamron will give you a lot more light and a lot lower noise than the Sony will, and of course a higher shutter speed, which means you can freeze motion a lot better. So now we get to the flaring examples, and someone had mentioned to me in one of the comments of my previous video that flaring was pretty bad on the Tamron, and that's why I didn't buy it. And indeed, especially at f11, we can see a significant amount of flaring down here in the center, and in all these comparison shots the flaring is comparable, so he's kind of right. It does get better at f2.8, so these are much more correctable, I would say, than what we see at f11. However, from a stylistic perspective, I think it's a little bit subjective, because in a shot like this, for example, when I'm trying to get sun stars, I kind of like a little bit of flaring in the shot. I find it gives it a little bit more of a dynamic look. So it really is up to you and how much flaring you can live within your lenses. Just finishing up. All right. I was just finishing my notes about our super scientific, super accurate test between these three lenses, which I obviously will have peer reviewed by several optical imaging experts, because I mean, who doesn't have a bevy of those at their beck and call? It's now time for the usual shameless YouTube plug. However, I also want to know in the comments down below if any of this information changed your mind perhaps about getting the Tamron 17-70 or not. I'd like to know what changed your mind, if anything. And if this helped you out, consider liking the video, consider subscribing to see more content like this one, and more shameless plugs at the end of every single video all the time. I'll see you in the next one.